Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Ivan Milat? Milat, who was also known as the Backpack Killer, was responsible for a number of murders which occurred in Australia between 1989 and 1993. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, consider supporting me on Patreon, and check out my podcast, Bella Grande Media. I will put the relevant links for those items in the description for this video. So first I'll look at the background in this case. I'll move to the timeline of the homicides, then offer my analysis. Starting with the background, Ivan Milat was born in New South Wales, Australia on December 27, 1944. His father was from Croatia and his mother was from Australia. Ivan was number 5 of 14 children. The majority of his brothers were quite familiar with local law enforcement. Ivan would live up to this tradition. At age 13, he was sent to a residential school after exhibiting antisocial behavior. Over the next few years, he would commit a number of crimes, including theft and burglary. He was arrested several times. In 1964, he was sentenced to a year and a half in prison for breaking and entering. He was only out of prison for a month when he was arrested for driving a stolen car. For this crime, he was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. He would be sentenced to 3 years in prison for theft in 1967. In April of 1971, he was charged in connection with abducting 2 18-year-old hitchhikers and sexually assaulting one of them. Before he was brought to trial for those charges, he committed a number of robberies along with a few of his brothers. He pretended that he brought an end to his own life. In reality, he moved to New Zealand. He would spend a year there before returning to Australia in 1974. When he re-entered Australia, he was arrested. I guess he thought they forgot about all those charges. He was put on trial. However, he was acquitted of the kidnapping and robbery charges. Ivan started working as a truck driver in 1975. Eventually, he took a job with the Department of Main Roads, which, from what I understand, is like the Department of Transportation combined with the Department of Motor Vehicles. Ivan married in 1983. The couple would have a daughter. His wife left in 1987 without telling him and hid from him for years. Evidently, he was violent. They divorced in 1989. Now moving to the timeline of the homicides. Starting in 1989, a few people who had been backpacking in Australia had gone missing. On September 19, 1992, a backpacker was discovered in the Belanglo State Forest, about a 2-hour drive from Sydney. The next day, a second body was discovered about 100 feet away. They were identified as female backpackers from Britain who had been missing since April 1992. One woman had been stabbed 14 times. The other woman had been stabbed as well, but she was also shot 10 times in the head. In October of 1993, 2 more bodies were found. They were both Australian nationals who had been stabbed. The camera of one of the victims had been discovered in December of 1989, about 75 miles away. 3 more bodies were discovered in November of 1993, 1 on November 1 and 2 on November 4. All 3 victims were from Germany. One had been shot in the head 6 times. 2 victims had been stabbed to death. One of those had been decapitated. Her skull was never located. Before the discovery in November, the police had already realized they were dealing with 1 or more serial killers. They started putting together what they knew about the crimes. Most of the victims had been killed in pairs. The police thought that maybe there was more than one killer working together. Some of the victims may have been sexually assaulted. It appears as though their pants were on and buttoned, but the zippers were down, like perhaps the pants were off and put back on hastily. Campsites were discovered close to the location of each body, suggesting the killer spent time with the victims, potentially during and after the homicides. An effort was made to conceal the bodies, although it wasn't a very good effort, and .22 caliber shell casings were found at the crime scenes. On November 13, 1993, the police received an important tip from a man named Paul Onions. It was really more of a reminder about an incident that he had reported years before. In January of 1990, Paul had been backpacking in Australia. He accepted a ride from a man who only identified himself as Bill. Near the Belanglo State Forest, Bill produced a revolver and a coil of rope, telling Paul that he was about to be robbed. Paul ran away. Bill pursued him and fired at least one shot. Paul flagged down a motorist named Joanne Berry and was able to escape. Later, the girlfriend of one of Ivan's co-workers called the police, saying that she thought that Ivan should be questioned in connection with the attempted robbery and attempted murder of Paul. The police told Paul that it was unlikely they would ever catch the perpetrator. The reports about the incident were lost. In 1993, when the police received the tip from Paul about the 1990 incident, Paul didn't think the police were too interested, but eventually they did get back to him. It appears as though the police were watching Ivan Milat. He had shown up on their radar because of his extensive general criminal history and because he had been accused of kidnapping specifically, even though, of course, he was not convicted for that crime. The police learned a few things about Ivan Milat. He sold a four-wheel drive SUV right after the bodies of the British women were discovered. He was not working on the days when the attacks took place, and he was obsessed with weapons. Paul Onions flew from the UK to Australia to help the police. He positively identified Ivan Milat as the man known as Bill who attacked him. Ivan was arrested on May 22, 1994 for the attack on Paul. He was charged with robbery and the possession of weapons. The police searched his home, the home of his mother, and the homes of 5 of his brothers. They found several firearms, including a disassembled Ruger 1022, one of the more popular .22 caliber rifles, but a relatively uncommon firearm in Australia. As it turns out, Ivan's Ruger 1022 was identified as the weapon used in the homicides. In addition, the police found a knife, foreign currency, sleeping bags, clothing, zip ties, rope, a cavalry sword, camping gear, and cameras. Some of those items belonged to the victims. On May 31, Ivan was charged with murdering the 7 backpackers. 2 of his brothers were charged with various crimes as well, including those related to drugs, stolen property, and weapons. During Ivan's trial, he testified on his own behalf. He came up with this complex theory where he blamed his brothers for the murders, like they had tried to frame him for the crimes. Some of his family members tried to give him alibis. Ultimately, Ivan was convicted. He was given 7 life sentences for the murders of the backpackers and 6 years for his crimes against Paul Onions. There was no possibility of parole. The police thought that Ivan committed more murders than those for which he was convicted. There may have been 8 or more additional victims. They also believed he may have had an accomplice for some of those crimes. Ivan's attorney made a statement on his deathbed saying that Ivan's sister, Shirley, had helped him kill the British backpackers. By the time Ivan's attorney made that statement, Shirley had been dead 2 years. Ivan had a rough time in prison. On his first day there, he was beaten by another inmate, souring the reputation of the already beleaguered Prison Welcome Committee. In 1997, Ivan attempted to escape along with another inmate who was there for selling drugs. Their plan failed. The other inmate was found dead in his cell. Presumably, he had brought an end to his own life. Ivan was transferred to a maximum security prison. He appealed his conviction several times, but was unsuccessful. In 2001, Ivan consumed staples, razor blades, and other metal objects. He was trying to get the prison officials to meet his demands, but his dining choices did not impress them. Ivan cut off his little finger with a plastic knife on January 6, 2009. His plan was to mail it to the High Court of Australia. He thought that this would convince them to grant his appeal. I'm not sure what he was thinking here. Maybe he wanted to point his finger at them, but they were too far away. Who knows? In 2006, there was a public outcry after Ivan was given a TV and a toaster, which he could keep in his cell. In 2011, in an effort to be given a PlayStation, he went on a 9-day hunger strike. In 2015, one of Ivan's brothers said that Ivan had shot a taxicab driver in 1962, leaving him paralyzed, adding yet another potential victim to Ivan's list of victims. Ivan Milat died of cancer on October 27, 2019, at age 74. Now moving to my analysis, Ivan had a long history of criminality, which increased in severity. Growing up, he was surrounded by people who regularly committed crimes. He probably committed many crimes for which he was never arrested. It is likely that Ivan started having fantasies about sexual domination and murder. He was very familiar with the forest where he killed his victims. He spent time there hunting before he was a killer. He was able to combine his familiarity with the area and the fact that some of the backpackers he targeted were from other countries. The backpackers who were not from Australia were more vulnerable because they were unfamiliar with the area. Ivan had a tremendous advantage. He was able to intimidate his victims with weapons and, for the most part, prevent them from running away. They probably believed that if they complied with him, their chances for survival would be greater, or they were simply too frightened to resist. Another unlikely ally for Ivan was law enforcement. They did not take the disappearances of the foreign backpackers very seriously in the beginning. They assumed that the backpackers died from something other than murder or were still alive somewhere, like they just wanted to disappear, to start new lives. In addition, even when the police realized the backpackers had been murdered, they initially believed a mental health professional who told them that the murderer was not a serial killer, that these murders were independent. This wasn't the fault of the police, of course. The mental health professional should have known better, but either way, this helped Ivan. What about Ivan's personality? Ivan's behavior aligns with Factor II psychopathy. He was impulsive, irresponsible, easily bored, and committed a wide variety of crimes. In addition, he was narcissistic. He was arrogant, envious, manipulative, grandiose, self-centered, and highly focused on his appearance. For someone who took so many chances, Ivan was very upset to be convicted and go to prison. He fired his attorney after being told that he might as well plead guilty. Ivan's behavior lines up with many of the typical serial killer characteristics, but there were a few areas where he doesn't fit the profile. As an adult, he made the decision not to drink alcohol or smoke. He was obsessive about cleanliness, and he liked things to be orderly. So looking at his potential 5-factor model personality profile, Ivan had low openness to experience, below average conscientiousness, above average extroversion, like he was sensation-seeking and assertive, very low agreeableness, he certainly didn't care much about the rights of others, and high neuroticism. He had difficulty resisting temptation, and he was angry. Now moving to my final thoughts, some people believe that the inappropriate police response in this case was due to fears of disrupting tourism. They didn't want to discourage backpackers from traveling to Australia. Interestingly, one of the areas in the forest where bodies were found was called Executioner's Drop. After the discovery of the bodies, the Belanglo Forest was referred to as the Forest of Death. I was thinking that whatever agency is in charge of tourism in Australia probably wasn't too happy about the naming conventions. If they were going to have an Executioner's Drop in a Forest of Death, they may as well have had the Canyon of Staying Home, Unemployed Tourism Workers Ridge, and the River of Missing Revenue. Interestingly, I imagine that the legend of Ivan Milat probably only helps tourism, just like how people drive by famous murder houses in various countries. Evidently, it's closed now after a public outcry, but sometime around 2015, there was a ghost tour of the forest that visited all the places where the bodies were found. Their slogan was, "Once you enter Belanglo State Forest, you may never come out." Ivan is to Belanglo State Forest as the Loch Ness Monster is to Scotland, or the Mothman is to West Virginia. Backpackers want to see where Ivan perpetrated his terrible crimes. Those are my thoughts on the case of Ivan Milat. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.